Good morning. I am Jamie Buckland with the West Virginia Few Families United for Education, and I'm excited this morning to talk with Jason. Jason Huffman is the State Director for Americans for Prosperity. Good morning, Jason.
Morning, Jamie. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So we have an agenda this morning, and our agenda is to make sure that our audience is kind of has an understanding of what a constitutional amendment is. This is going to be on the ballot here in less than a month, right? Like it's go time, and so we know that our audience has questions. We want to be the place for all things education, and this definitely has the potential to impact families in West Virginia. So Jason, if you'll just get us started and tell us a little bit about how you got started with Americans for Prosperity and kind of what you do in your role.
Sure. So, first off, Americans for Prosperity, we're a national nonprofit organization. We have 35 different state chapters all across the country, and I have the pleasure of running the state chapter here in West Virginia. A lifelong West Virginian, grew up in Buchanan, West Virginia, live in Charleston now. And basically, we try to act as a platform for folks to be able to unite around issues that we know will tackle some of the biggest problems facing society from a policy standpoint. And that has led to, I think, particularly when it comes to the education sphere and educational freedom in West Virginia, a real, I think, organic grassroots movement of folks who want to see parents be in control. They want to see parents have the ability to make sure their kid has access to the education that's right for their unique needs.
Right. Yeah. And how long have you been with AFP?
Since about 2015. Prior to that, I was the operations director for the state Republican Party here in West Virginia.
Okay, great. So I have been able to be familiar with your work through the Coalition for Hope Scholarship. That's kind of how I got introduced to AFP and your work in supporting educational freedom. And of course, we've been able to celebrate over the last few days with that ruling. Do you just want to speak to that ruling and what that kind of means to you being from West Virginia? How do you see Hope Scholarship impacting even the community that you grew up in?
Sure. And so I think when it comes to the Hope Scholarship, that is a historical transformation in how we view education, not only in West Virginia, but I think it's going to have sort of a ripple effect into a lot of other states. You've already seen Arizona change their education savings account program to be universal, like West Virginia's is. And so, really, this is an example of West Virginia sort of leading the way in terms of what we think is really a core transformation, getting education back to making sure that parents have the ability to ensure that their kids have the education that's right for them based on their unique needs, not based on their zip code, not based on their income, but really based on the aptitude and hopes and dreams of that child. And we all know, and parents will tell you, that every kid is unique. And so this is a sort of shift, a major shift toward the uniqueness of every child. And I think it's very important, particularly, a lot of folks have tried to make the Hope Scholarship program an us versus them proposition, traditional public school versus other means of education. And I think we thoroughly reject that idea. Particularly, this isn't about just sending your kid to a private school. It's about a fully customizable education that you're able to decipher with your student exactly what kind of educational pathway will suit their needs uniquely. And it's not just about public versus private. It's there is a whole host of, I think, particularly education pathways that we haven't even conceived of yet that the Hope Scholarship is going to allow folks to truly leverage. And it's a big deal.
It is a big deal. And you're from Upshur County, right? And so I had the pleasure just this past year in working with Amy from Buchanan Christian Academy. And they have been I think they're in their second official year. And what a gift it was to meet families in that community that were there specifically because they were saying they never would have been able to afford a private education. And it, to my understanding, it's the first private school that's actually getting built up as a program in Upshur County. And I got to meet parents, and not just parents, but grandparents that were there at their open house to find out more about the Hope Scholarship, because it was opening up doors that they have always known as being closed.
Yeah, and I think, just the brass tacks of the Hope Scholarship, you're able to receive $4,300 roughly of your tax dollars back in your pocket to educate your child in the way that you best see fit. And really, I think what we're going to see come from this, Jamie, is a sort of combination of different learning pathways being used in unison. You can have a pathway that is partially private, partially public schooling, tied in with some other individualized education, tutors, et cetera, and really, really set your child up for the educational experience that they need, right? And so I think we're going to see a lot of innovation in terms of education all throughout the state as a result of this. And frankly, we're head over heels ecstatic that the Supreme Court found the wisdom to uphold the law. We always maintained that it was in fact constitutional, and I think some of the folks that were out to try to stop the program, I think their attorney said they were from Los Angeles and New York City. So I wouldn't exactly say they represented our values in that case.
That's right. That's right. Well, I am, of course, thrilled. My little Easton is my very own Hope Scholar, and we're excited at the potential of how this will impact his schooling, because he's just in kindergarten. So now we've got 12 years ahead of us that are going to be heavily impacted, and we're going to just benefit greatly from being able to invest in resources that we would have never even had on the menu without the Hope Scholarship. So in our work, as I've gotten more familiar with you and your work at AFP, I've began to see more of the bigger picture of all of the moving parts that go into actually moving forward in effective changes. And part of that is in the legislative realm, if you will. And so we want to talk this morning about Amendment 4. But I know that if I look back to my journey on all of this, there was a time where I didn't understand what a constitutional amendment, like what does that even mean? So let's start there. What is a constitutional amendment, and what does it even have the potential to do?
So basically, the state constitution has a process through which it can be amended, much like the federal constitution. And basically, the process for that is as follows: the legislature will have a bill that acts as a constitutional amendment, and it has to receive 2/3 vote in each chamber of the legislature and be signed by the governor, which this amendment had received. So it received bipartisan support in order to pass. Then that constitutional amendment goes on the ballot, either in the primary or the general. In this case, it will be the general election on November 8th. And citizens are able to vote as to whether they want to ratify that constitutional amendment. And there are 4 different amendments that are going to be on the ballot this November. And our organization is in a grassroots effort to support 2 of those amendments, Amendment 2 and Amendment 4.
Okay. And with Amendment 4, what does it have the specific potential to do? Because I think our audience needs to kind of understand that this necessarily isn't enacting anything different, like the moment that it passes, things aren't going to look different in that moment. What does it have the potential to do?
Yeah, so what Amendment 4 does in practice, and you have to understand West Virginia's rulemaking process, and it's a little bit in the weeds, but the top line is this: Amendment 4 is going to ensure that parents have a voice when it comes to the educational policies coming out of Charleston. Right now, the only agency in West Virginia that can create a rule and it immediately has the force of law without any oversight is the state school board. We believe that has created a situation where parents do not have enough influence, enough power when it comes to how education is being regulated in the state. Unlike your local school board, the state school board consists of appointed positions, so they're not elected. Those folks are appointed to 9-year terms, and their roles are largely irrevocable except for cases of gross misconduct, things of that nature. And so, unlike every other agency that has to send their rule making before the legislature, so somebody that's elected has a say and can be held accountable for those decisions, the school board does not have to do that. The state school board does not have to. What Amendment 4 does is simply put the state school board under the same legislative rulemaking process as every other state agency. And we think that's really important and critical because, the biggest accountability mechanism that citizens have are the folks that you elect to represent you in the state house. And we want those individuals to have at least some oversight of the rules that are coming out of the State Department of Education.
I know when I got started in 2019 as the legislative liaison for a homeschool support group here in Southern West Virginia, I had a wonderful mentor, John Carey. He's been a lobbyist through CHUV, the Christian Home Educator West Virginia Association of something. I butchered that. But John has been a great mentor to me over the years. And I remember my first meeting with him, he was so intent on ensuring that I understood just how much power the Department of Education actually had, like the fourth branch of government, if you will, because when you open up code and you start to, amend or you introduce new legislation, when they go to, which it's a fancy word, but when they go to promulgate rules, when they go to spell out how we're going to implement things, they have this authority to interpret it and basically write policies that are going to be implemented without that ever going back. So to me, that is the point of what Amendment 4 is that we're actually bringing about some scrutiny, if you will, and the opportunity for checks and balances that we don't currently have. And so I'm hearing some of the opposition to Amendment 4 talk about this could politicize it. But I don't see it that way. Am I seeing it wrong? I mean, when I read it, I feel like this actually removes the potential for education to become politicized.
I think you're exactly right. That's one of the arguments that I've sort of heard some of the interest groups out there make. And will Amendment 4 politicize education? No, I do not think so. In fact, I would argue that the lack of oversight over the education bureaucracy in West Virginia has already led to education becoming politicized, and in a way that doesn't really reflect our values as a state. There's no accountability in the system currently for the rules and regulations coming from the State Board of Education. And what that means is that there are special interests that have total control over what our kids learn. Governor Justice has done a great job of adding some members to the state school board that we believe are probably more aligned when it comes to educational freedom and making sure that parents are really sort of in the driver's seat. But without Amendment 4, we have no way to hold folks accountable. And what Amendment 4 does is allow state lawmakers to have that final say over the education regulation. So somebody that's not a lifelong bureaucrat that's entrenched in the system or is appointed, but rather elected, has the ability to have oversight.
Does the opposition have a good argument? Is there any reason for us to be concerned about Amendment 4? And if there is, what do you feel like is the provision that's going to help offset that?
Honestly, I mean, parents know better than Charleston bureaucrats. That's what it comes down to. And Amendment 4 is going to make sure that their voices are heard, right? I think the strongest argument that I've seen is simply the way that the amendment is worded on the ballot. It makes a lot of folks think that you're talking about their local school board, and that's not the case. Because local school boards are already elected. So, parents have that accountability mechanism readily available to them on the local level. What we're talking about is the state school board, which is appointed, not elected, and we need somebody that's elected and accountable to the people to have oversight over the regulations. So I think, that's probably, when misleading and confusing talking points are your best arguments, you might be losing. And so we hope that that's the case because we really believe that Amendment 4 should pass.
Right. And I just want to offer up, I got to see firsthand how this is needed when I worked on the homeschool access bill in 2020. And so that bill was positioned to give homeschoolers a pathway for eligibility with the WVSSAC. And it wasn't exactly what we wanted. There were some compromises made. We still have work to do. But in implementing that, once the rules came out, it had been interpreted, and now we were implementing the interpretation of the state board's rule on the bill. And it wasn't exactly what we thought we had when we went in and passed that. And so I got to kind of see firsthand, and just to give you the audience the nuts and bolts of that, homeschoolers in the way that it's written should be able to be eligible with a portfolio review, because that satisfies our assessment with the homeschool code. But now they're required to test, and not every child is able to perform on a test, nor is that necessarily an accurate reflection of their academic year that they've had. But unfortunately, because it was interpreted that way, there are dozens of families that I have to tell their children that they aren't eligible because they can't get the test scores that the state requires of them. So I wanted our audience to just have some real idea of what this could do and how this could impact our state. So what do we need to do moving forward? Where do we go to find out more about your work and to help spread the information and raise awareness about Amendment 4?
Well, sure. I think, you can have folks take a look at, our social media pages, Americans for Prosperity, West Virginia. AmericansForProsperity.org is where you'll find all of our information. I would encourage folks to talk to their friends and their neighbors about these issues, and just, again, continue to educate themselves on really why this is so important. I think it's probably one of the more important changes that we will have made to West Virginia's Constitution in quite some time. Granted, constitutional amendments are a bit of a rarity in West Virginia, and so I think it's just that much more important that folks are vocal about this one and are tuned in and engaged, because it's about our kids and making sure that parents have a voice in education, and that is very, very critical to our state moving forward.
Thank you so much for taking the time to help go through this. I'm going to steal your talking points as I talk within my community and to our audience. So I appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us. We appreciate your work, and I hope that you have a great day. Thanks so much, Jason.
Yep. Thank you all.